My daughter forgot to hang up after we spoke. Then I overheard her tell her friends, "What a loser. I pity him. He's always playing Mr. Nice Man but doesn't even know my real dad." I quietly hung up and made a decision that changed everything. I will tell you how it all unfolded. First, let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout-out in our next story. Today's special shout-out goes to Joan Kyle from New York. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. I had just finished watering the small garden Monica insisted we build 3 summers ago, back when she still hummed to herself in the kitchen and asked about my day. The early evening air was thick with heat, and the scent of soil clung to my fingers as I leaned back against the porch railing. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and when I saw it was Alyssa, my heart did that little leap it always did when she called. No matter how busy work was or how tired I felt, hearing her voice had a way of softening me. She was my only child, my pride, the one I stayed up with during stomach flus and math homework breakdowns. I hit answer and smiled before I even heard her voice. "Hey, kiddo," I said, settling into the wooden bench near the door. She sounded distracted. "Hey, yeah, just checking in." The call lasted maybe 5 minutes. She told me about a friend's upcoming birthday trip, a class she hated, and asked if I could send a bit more for her groceries this month. I said yes, of course. I always said yes. I told her I loved her, that I missed her, and reminded her to take her vitamins. She chuckled lightly and said, "You're such a dad," before we said goodbye. But she didn't hang up. That's when I heard it. Voices in the background, a soft shuffling, and then her laugh, this different kind of laugh. The one she used when she was with friends, sharper, with a bite to it. "Oh my God," she said, "that was him." Someone asked something I couldn't hear clearly, and she replied, "My mom's husband. The loser. He tries so hard. I pity him, honestly. Always playing Mr. Nice Man, and he doesn't even know who my real dad is." The words didn't make sense at first. I thought I'd misheard. My mind raced to fill in other possibilities. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe she was mimicking someone else. Maybe this was one of those cruel TikTok pranks kids did. But no one laughed. The silence after her statement was casual. No one corrected her. No one was surprised. That silence was what broke me. I ended the call quietly. My hands were shaking, but I didn't feel angry yet. Just cold. Like someone had poured ice water down my back. I sat there on the porch for what must have been 20 minutes, phone still in my hand, heart beating in a way that didn't feel natural. The sun had gone down. Monica was inside making dinner. I could smell garlic and butter, but the warmth didn't reach me anymore. I didn't go in right away. That night, I stared at the ceiling long after Monica had fallen asleep beside me. Her breathing was slow and even, like nothing had changed. Like she wasn't possibly hiding something that would rewrite my entire life. I watched the shadows shift on the ceiling and thought of Alyssa's first birthday, how she clung to me when we took her to the petting zoo. I thought of the time she scraped her knee and screamed for me over her mother. All those years, all those moments, what were they? Now, by 3 a.m., I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to confront Monica without proof. No, I needed facts. The kind that couldn't be twisted or denied. I wanted to understand everything, what had happened, when and why. I needed to know what was real and what was just a well-maintained illusion. So I pulled out an old business card from a drawer in my study, a private investigator I had helped years ago with a local charity case. I emailed him that night. Subject line, personal, urgent, discreet. The next few days were slow torture. I still said good morning to Monica, still went to work, still sent Alyssa a small grocery transfer. But I began to observe instead of participate. I watched how Monica smiled when she texted, the way she avoided eye contact during dinner. I noticed that Alyssa's baby pictures were fewer than I remembered, and Monica had always been oddly controlling about which ones we kept framed. Details I'd never questioned before now lit up in my memory like blinking neon signs. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't want sympathy. I didn't want advice. What I wanted was truth, and then a plan. So I started making quiet moves. I visited the bank and began changing account structures. I called my attorney under the guise of updating my will, but really, I was laying down a legal paper trail. Property titles, retirement accounts, even the cabin my father left me. I shifted everything slowly, invisibly, away from shared access. A week later, I stood in a pharmacy, staring at a rack of DNA testing kits like they were ticking bombs. I bought one and slipped it into my briefcase. When I handed it to Alyssa the next weekend, I told her it was part of a fun genealogy project, something I was doing for the whole family. She rolled her eyes, called me a nerd, and swabbed her mouth without question. I smiled through it all, each second of that exchange carving into me like glass. That night, I sealed the envelope and dropped it off at a private lab the investigator recommended. Then I sat in my car for 10 minutes, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I didn't cry. Not yet. The tears would come later, after the results, after the confrontation, after the fallout. But in that moment, I was simply hollow. I didn't know who I was to Alyssa anymore. Maybe I never did. The waiting became a second skin, one I couldn't peel off no matter how busy I tried to stay. Every task at work, every grant proposal I reviewed or phone call I answered, was filtered through a numb haze. My body moved, my mouth said all the right things, but my mind never left that sealed DNA envelope. I kept the tracking receipt in my wallet and checked it twice a day. Part of me hoped something would go wrong, that the results would get lost in transit or flagged as inconclusive. But another part, the part that had been twisted into doubt by Alyssa's voice, needed the truth more than it feared the answer. And while the envelope made its way through labs and machines, the private investigator was out there digging through the past I had never questioned. His first report came 3 days in. A file of photos and neatly worded summaries dropped in my inbox with the subject line, Timeline, M. Carter. Monica's name stared back at me from every page. The man she had been meeting 17 years ago, Jeffrey Sloan, worked at her firm then. According to the report, their affair lasted roughly 6 months and ended when he was transferred to a different branch in Chicago. There were emails, copies of receipts, even a hotel check-in log, all dated exactly 9 months before Alyssa was born. I sat in my car again when I opened the folder, parked outside my office with the engine running. My coffee had gone cold, untouched beside me. The investigator's tone was professional, cold, mercifully distant. He didn't write what I knew he had to be thinking. The odds were damning. I called my lawyer that night under the pretense of needing asset protection advice. I didn't mention Monica, not yet, but we talked about how to separate property for estate planning reasons. She walked me through setting up a family trust, except it wasn't for the family anymore. I made sure my name was the only one on it. The lake cabin, the investment condo, and even the stocks I'd quietly built over 2 decades, all of it began to shift slowly out of our joint names. There was no satisfaction in it, just a sense of quiet necessity, like boarding up windows before a storm you know is coming. At home, I was polite, cordial. I asked Monica about her day, nodded at her stories, even smiled when she handed me a plate of pasta. She didn't notice the shift in my energy, or maybe she mistook it for stress. Either way, she didn't ask. That was always her way. She liked things smooth, easy, undisturbed. We never fought much, mostly because I swallowed most things down before they could turn into arguments. It's funny, I used to take pride in that. Thought it may be the reasonable one. Now, I wondered if it just made me easy to lie to. Alyssa texted the next day asking for money again. Nothing major, just a "can you Venmo me $50? Need to cover a textbook." I sent it without comment. Then I stared at the transaction confirmation for 5 minutes, realizing that I didn't even know what classes she was taking this semester. We used to talk about her courses in detail. She'd call me after lectures, excited about a professor or a theory she wanted to argue. But now, everything was surface level. Convenience level. The kind of conversations you have with someone who's become optional in your life. I told the investigator to look into Jeffrey Sloan. Where he was now, what he did, whether he had any contact with Monica since the affair. The reply came swiftly. Divorced twice, currently working in tech consulting out of San Diego. No recent known contact with Monica. No signs of paternity suits or child support. Just a man who had dropped out of our lives like a stone into water, ripples forgotten. The DNA results arrived at the end of the week. A simple PDF file, clinical in its precision. The words were as direct as they were devastating. Probability of paternity, 0%. I read the line 3 times, and then again, because part of me refused to let it sink in all at once. 0%. Not a shred of me in her blood. Not even a trace of my DNA in the child I'd carried on my shoulders through every Disneyland trip, every first day of school photo, every sleepless night after a breakup. She wasn't mine, not biologically, anyway. And suddenly, it felt like she never really had been. Not emotionally. Not loyally. I didn't tell anyone. Not Monica, not Alyssa, not even the investigator. I sat with it for a full 24 hours, letting the knowledge carve itself into my bones. I thought about all the small ways I had betrayed myself over the years. Letting Monica's coldness slide. Dismissing Alyssa's growing distance as teenage rebellion. Pretending that my quiet unhappiness was just part of growing older. No more pretending. I was done performing. I didn't need their explanations. I needed closure. And justice. That night, I went into the study and opened a locked drawer where I kept our marriage certificate and the deed to the house. I took out the divorce papers I had started filling out weeks earlier, blank spaces where names now felt like dead weight. I printed the finalized version and signed and placed them in a manila folder. It was almost time. The confrontation wouldn't be loud or explosive. It would be deliberate, like everything else I'd done since that phone call. I wasn't looking for revenge. I was reclaiming something they had quietly taken from me, my dignity. As I lay in bed next to Monica that night, I turned slightly away from her. Her breathing was steady, completely unaware. I thought of the years I'd spent believing in the family we had built together. The holidays. The traditions. The photos lining the stairwell. All carefully curated lies held together by my refusal to question anything. That era was over. I had peeled back the curtain, and now I could never look at either of them the same way again. I always thought pain hit like a blow, a sharp, instant break. But this wasn't that. It was slower, like a leak in the foundation, water creeping under every surface I thought was solid. In the days after the DNA results confirmed what I already feared, everything felt too quiet. Even the birds outside the window seemed to chirp less. I started noticing sounds that had always been there. The way the fridge hummed at night, the way Monica sighed as she turned in bed, as if carrying a burden I had never noticed. Maybe she had always been sighing like that. Maybe I just wasn't listening before. I reread the report more times than I care to admit. It wasn't the science I was stuck on. I understood what 0% probability meant. What haunted me was the image of Alyssa's birth, how I had cried holding her, how I had kissed her tiny forehead and whispered promises I meant with my whole heart. I remembered Monica smiling at me from the hospital bed, her eyes puffy but proud, and how I'd thought, we did this. I didn't know then that it wasn't true. That she had already lied to me in the deepest way a partner could lie. She let me build my life on a secret she chose to bury. I sat across from Monica at dinner the next night, watching her twirl pasta around her fork like we were still a normal couple. She asked if I'd fixed the backyard faucet, and I nodded. She talked about a neighbor's dog being loose again, and I listened. I studied the lines on her face, the familiar tilt of her head, the way her hands moved when she spoke. None of it betrayed the gravity of what she had done. That, somehow, was worse than the act itself. That she had lived so comfortably inside a lie for 17 years. How do you look someone in the eye for that long without choking on the truth? I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I needed to confront her, not to scream, not to punish, but to give the facts shape. I needed to see what she would say when her version of the story could no longer stand. So I asked her to sit down after dinner. I remember how she tilted her head slightly, confused, wiping her hands on a dish towel like it was any other night. I pulled the folder from the study drawer and placed it on the table. Inside were the printed results, the timeline from the investigator, and the divorce papers. I said her name quietly, Monica, and when she looked at me, I saw it. Just a flicker, barely noticeable, but enough. Fear. Recognition. I know, I said simply. I know about Jeffrey Sloan. I know about the affair. And I know Alyssa isn't mine. At first, she froze. Not the dramatic collapse you see in movies. Just stillness, like her brain was buffering, trying to find a lie fast enough to patch the hole. Then she shook her head. What are you talking about? I didn't answer. I just opened the folder and turned the DNA report toward her. She looked down at it, scanned the words, and for a moment, she didn't speak. Then she pushed the paper back and stood up. David, this is crazy. That test. Those things aren't even accurate. Where did you get this? I didn't flinch. A certified lab. Not a kit from a pharmacy. It's conclusive. She sat back down slowly, her hands now trembling. You had her tested? Without telling me. I nodded. After I heard what she said on the phone. After I found out I've been living a lie. The silence between us was electric, buzzing with a decade and a half of deception. Monica looked down at the table and whispered, "It was a mistake. I was lonely. You were always working late, always distracted with your projects." "No," I cut in, my voice calm but firm. "Don't you dare make this about my schedule. Don't rewrite this into something I caused." She began to cry then, quietly at first. I didn't think it would matter. I thought I could bury it. I never thought she wasn't yours. I didn't even get a test myself. You didn't think she wasn't mine. I repeated, the bitterness rising despite my effort to stay level. You gambled with my life, Monica. With her life. And then you let me raise her, love her, devote everything I had to her, knowing this might not even be my child. She reached for my hand across the table, but I pulled it back. "David, please. We can work through this. Therapy. Counseling. We've built a life together. Don't throw it away over one mistake." "One mistake," I said quietly. 17 years of a lie isn't one mistake. It's a choice. And you made it every single day. I slid the divorce papers across the table. She stared at them like they were poison. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. I stood up, walked to the door of the study, and turned once before leaving the room. "I'm done, Monica. I deserve better than this. I deserve the truth." That night, I didn't sleep in our bed. I took the guest room, locking the door behind me. My heart ached, yes, but it was also strangely light. Like I had finally set something down I didn't realize I'd been carrying. The lie had been exposed. The confrontation had happened. There was nothing left to guess or decode. Just fallout. Just choices. As I lay there in the darkness, I thought of Alyssa, not the girl who mocked me on the phone, but the little girl who once held my hand walking to preschool. I didn't know what would happen with her next, but I knew one thing for sure. I wouldn't be the one chasing after people who didn't see my worth anymore. Not Monica. Not Alyssa. Not anyone. The next morning felt hollow, like waking up in a house that no longer belonged to me. Monica didn't come to the guest room. I heard her moving around the kitchen, opening and closing cabinets with unnatural gentleness. It was the kind of quiet that only comes after a storm has touched down and everyone's pretending the roof isn't missing. I stayed in bed longer than usual, staring at the ceiling, thinking of all the breakfasts I used to make for Alyssa before school. Pancakes on Tuesdays, scrambled eggs on Fridays. Those mornings felt so far away now, like another man's memories I was trespassing on. Around 10, I heard the front door creak open. Alyssa's voice filled the hallway, casual and unaware. "Mom? You here?" There was a lightness in her tone, the kind reserved for someone who thinks they're walking into familiar comfort. Monica must have called her. Of course she did. She couldn't handle the weight alone. I sat up slowly, pulled on a sweater, and braced myself. My hands didn't shake. My chest didn't burn. I was past the fire now. All that remained was the ash. I stepped into the hallway as Alyssa rounded the corner. She stopped mid-step when she saw me, her face breaking into a surprised smile. "Hey, Dad. What's going on?" Mom sounded weird on the phone. Her voice, calling me Dad, like it meant something, hit me like a wave I refused to drown in. I nodded once. "We need to talk." She glanced past me toward the kitchen. "Where's Mom?" "She's upstairs." I asked her to give us a minute. Alyssa narrowed her eyes, arms crossing over her chest. "What's this about?" I gestured toward the living room, and she followed reluctantly. She sat on the edge of the couch like it might burn her if she got too comfortable. I sat across from her in the armchair that used to be my favorite. Suddenly, it felt too small for what I had to say. "I overheard something," I began, keeping my voice steady. "Last week, after our call, you didn't hang up." Her expression shifted instantly, confusion giving way to dread. "Okay. I heard you talking to your friends," I continued, "saying I was a loser, that I wasn't your real dad, that you pity me." She opened her mouth, closed it, then looked away. It was a joke. I didn't mean, "Stop," I said, my tone firmer than it had ever been with her. "Don't lie to me. Not now." She looked at me then, really looked, and for a moment, something flickered behind her eyes, something like fear or guilt. But just as quickly, it vanished. Fine, she said flatly. You're mad I said something dumb. But what? You're gonna throw away our whole relationship over that? I almost laughed. Our relationship? I repeated. You mean the one built on silence and convenience? Where I pay your bills and you ignore my calls unless you need something. She rolled her eyes. Here we go? No, I said. Here I go. I got the DNA results, Alyssa. She froze. They came back last week. You're not my biological daughter. The room went silent, thick with the weight of truth. She blinked at me, the bravado draining from her face. You did a test behind my back? Yes. After 17 years of raising you, loving you, protecting you, I had to find out if the foundation of my life was real. It wasn't. She stood abruptly. Well, that's low. You don't think I have feelings? You don't think this hurts me? I stood too. This hurts you? You mocked me. You lied to me. You took everything I gave and spit on it when you thought I couldn't hear. She shook her head, arms flailing. I didn't ask to be born. This wasn't my fault. You're the one who's abandoning me over biology. I'm not abandoning you, I said, lowering my voice. I'm drawing a line. Because love without respect isn't love, it's servitude. And I won't live like that anymore. She stared at me, stunned. So what? I'm nothing to you now. I swallowed hard. You were everything to me. But now I know the truth. And I need to step away from people who don't see my worth. The front door opened, and Monica appeared at the end of the hallway, her eyes red and puffy. David, please, she whispered. Let's not do this like this. I turned toward her. I gave you a chance last night. This isn't anger, Monica. This is clarity. I looked back at Alyssa, who now stood motionless, tears forming but not falling. She didn't reach for me, didn't apologize, just stood there, silent and stunned. I wish you both the best, I said finally. But I'm done playing the fool in a story I didn't write. I left them there, in the house I built, the life I funded, walking out into the sunlight with nothing but my keys and my dignity. The air felt different, lighter, like I had walked through fire and come out on the other side clean. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I left my phone on silent in the glove compartment and drove for hours without music, windows down, letting the wind tangle through the silence I hadn't let myself feel in weeks. My destination wasn't planned. I just knew I couldn't stay in that house another night, with Monica's sobbing in the next room and the ghost of Alyssa's betrayal clinging to every framed photo. I ended up at the cabin, my father's old place by the lake. It had been untouched for months, maybe years, save for the occasional maintenance check. When I unlocked the door, the smell of pine wood and dust rushed out to meet me. It didn't feel like home, but it didn't lie to me either. That was enough. The first few days blurred together in a fog of sleep, long walks through the forest trail, and quiet meals eaten in silence. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even speak aloud. My thoughts churned constantly, but for once, they weren't all questions. They were acknowledgments, realizations. I thought about how long I'd accepted scraps of affection from Monica, how I had explained away Alyssa's coldness as a phase that never passed. I thought about how I convinced myself that being a good man meant tolerating disrespect with grace. But now, sitting alone at a creaky table in a cabin where no one needed anything from me, I saw it clearly. All my sacrifices hadn't earned me loyalty, they had trained others to see me as a given. I started waking up early again, the way I used to before the weight of the marriage dulled me into late starts and tired sighs. I made coffee slowly, intentionally. I stood by the lake with a mug in hand, watching the fog lift off the water, birds skimming the surface. I began taking photos with my old camera, the one I hadn't touched in over a decade. I'd forgotten how much I loved the quiet hunt for light and angle, the way a photo could freeze a feeling no words ever could. I wasn't trying to build a new life yet. I was just trying to remember who I was before I gave so much of myself away. People started calling, of course. First, a few texts from mutual friends. Heard things are rough. Let me know if you want to talk. Then Monica left a voicemail, her voice trembling, saying, "We can still fix this." I didn't respond. Alyssa tried once. Just one message. "I didn't mean to hurt you." No apology. No accountability. Just that. I blocked the number after that. I had nothing left to give them. Not energy. Not explanations. Definitely not forgiveness. Not yet. A week in, I finally opened up to one person, my old college roommate, Nate, who had always been the kind of friend you didn't need to perform for. He came up to the cabin without hesitation, brought beer and a deck of cards, and didn't ask a single question until I was ready to speak. We sat on the porch in the late afternoon sun, playing poker with no bets, and I told him everything. The call, the test, the confrontation, the fallout. He didn't interrupt, just listened. When I was done, he nodded slowly and said, "I always knew you loved too hard, man. Too purely. That's why it cuts so deep." It wasn't wisdom. It wasn't a solution. But it was recognition. And that was enough to let me breathe a little deeper. The days passed gently after that. I read books I hadn't touched in years, ones I used to recommend to Alyssa when she still cared about what I thought. I walked for hours without checking the time. I cooked simple meals, stews, grilled vegetables, toast with eggs, and ate every bite without distraction. I didn't look at my phone, didn't scroll through old photos. I was done torturing myself with what-ifs. The past had spoken clearly. The silence that followed wasn't loneliness, it was relief. One night, a thunderstorm rolled in. I sat by the window with a glass of wine, watching the lightning crack open the sky. I thought of Monica, alone in that big house, trying to rewrite history with apologies that came too late. I thought of Alyssa, probably venting to her friends, spinning the story into something that made me the villain. I didn't hate them. I just didn't recognize them anymore. And maybe I never really had. What struck me most during those long, quiet days was how much space I had in my life now, space I didn't know I'd been missing. Emotional space, mental clarity, physical freedom. I didn't have to walk on eggshells. I didn't have to explain myself. I didn't have to earn the love that should have been given freely. There was no drama, no manipulation, no carefully worded texts meant to keep the peace. Just the truth. Just me. I started writing again. Nothing formal, just journal entries. Reflections. Letters I didn't intend to send. I wrote one to Alyssa. Not to guilt her. Not to beg for understanding. Just to say what needed saying. You were the best part of my life, even if you weren't mine. But love without respect is self-destruction. I hope someday you understand that. I hope you build better than what you were given. I folded the letter and tucked it into a book. Maybe I'd send it someday. Maybe not. Some things didn't need witnesses. By the end of the second week, I stood at the edge of the lake, my feet in the cold water, and felt something I hadn't felt in years, stillness. Not numbness. Not avoidance. Just the simple, grounded weight of being exactly where I was supposed to be. No pretending. No pleasing. Just standing still, finally, in the quiet. The final decision didn't come with fireworks or anger. It came one crisp morning as I was chopping wood behind the cabin, the kind of physical labor that demands rhythm over thought. The sun was just cresting the trees, spilling gold across the clearing, and I realized I didn't want to go back, not to the house, not to the city, not to the version of myself that lived for other people's comfort while quietly falling apart. That man was gone now, shaved away by betrayal, stripped bare by truth. All that was left was someone I could finally recognize, someone who wasn't afraid to be alone. I drove back into town a week later, not to return, but to finish what I started. I met with the lawyer, signed the final paperwork, and arranged for a moving service to collect the rest of my things. Monica had already signed the divorce papers, a process she once swore would never happen now reduced to 3 business days and a courier envelope. There was no scene, no last-minute begging. She sent a single email before I left the office. "I hope someday you'll forgive me." I didn't respond, not out of cruelty, but because I knew forgiveness would come, if at all, on my terms. Not as an answer to guilt, not as a bandage for a wound still healing. I didn't see Alyssa again. Part of me had hoped she'd reach out, not to explain, but to own her part, to show she saw me now, not just as a source of money or comfort, but as a person who bled when cut. But she didn't. And that silence, too, said everything. I stopped looking at her social media, blocked her number not out of spite, but preservation. It hurt like hell at first, the ache of absence, the finality. But over time, even that pain began to dull into something manageable, something honest. The new place I moved into was modest, a 1-bedroom condo on the edge of town, close to a hiking trail and a small cafe where nobody knew my name. I didn't need space for guests or family dinners. I just needed peace. The walls were bare for a while, until I started framing some of the photographs I took at the lake. Sunlight on water, the silhouette of trees, a fox in mid-stride. They weren't masterpieces, but they were mine. Proof that I existed beyond the roles other people assigned me. I started volunteering again, at a local shelter this time, where no one asked me about my personal life, only if I could fix a leak or load crates into a van. The simplicity was comforting. I didn't have to be dad or husband or the nice guy who always says yes. I could just be David. And David, it turns out, was enough. Some nights I still dreamed of her, Alyssa, as a little girl, running across the park, her tiny arms stretched toward me. I'd wake up with a tightness in my chest, my body aching from the phantom weight of who I used to be. But even in those moments, I didn't regret leaving. I regretted staying as long as I did. Regretted the way I ignored the red flags, the gut instincts, the small humiliations I dressed up as compromise. But walking away, cutting the ties, that was the first act of self-respect I'd done in years. Friends started asking questions eventually. Some close ones. Some distant voices from the past. What happened? Is it true? Why didn't you fight for them? I didn't explain. Not really. Because this wasn't about revenge or bitterness. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about finally choosing myself in a life where I'd been the last priority for too long. Some people understood. Some didn't. I stopped measuring my decisions by other people's approval. One rainy afternoon, I visited my parents' graves. I hadn't been in a while. I knelt down beside them and spoke softly, not as a son begging for guidance, but as a man standing in the truth of who he'd become. I love them, I whispered, with everything I had. But love isn't enough when it's not returned with honesty. I let it define me for too long. I'm letting it go now. The rain soaked through my jacket, and I let it. Some things needed to be washed clean. I never remarried. Never dated. Maybe someday I will. But if I do, it'll be on new terms. I won't trade silence for peace or obedience for affection. I won't be chosen only when it's easy. Whoever stands beside me next will have to see me fully, and I'll expect nothing less. I still think of her sometimes, Alyssa. I wonder if she ever tells the truth when people ask about me. If she ever looks back at the man who tied her shoes, sat through her ballet recitals, and stood by her during every heartbreak. If she realizes what she lost when she chose pride over apology. I hope so. I don't wish her harm. Just clarity. The kind I had to earn the hard way. And Monica? I don't hate her either. I think, in some way, she loved the version of me that stayed silent, that kept the ship afloat no matter how many holes she poked in the hull. But that man died the day I heard my daughter call me a loser. The day the DNA report confirmed what my gut had whispered for years. The day I finally said no more. Now, I sit most mornings with a cup of black coffee and a quiet heart. The world isn't perfect. Neither am I. But I'm honest. I'm whole. And I'm not pretending anymore. There's power in that. Sometimes people say the truth sets you free. I don't think that's quite right. The truth hurts first. It cuts you. But then, when the bleeding stops, it gives you something you never had before: clarity, strength, and the unshakable knowledge that survival isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning. And this is mine. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you think about your own boundaries and worth, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful, real-life family dramas told from the heart. Share your thoughts below. Your voice matters here. See you soon in the next story.